afternoon. My name is Melinda Herring, and I am the Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. We're so glad to co-sponsor this event with the Pinchuk Foundation and the Atlantic Council's Transatlantic Security Initiative. Thank you so much for joining us. On Friday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged NATO to fast-track Ukraine's bid to join the security organization. But, to cut to the chase, it's not going to happen now. If NATO membership is a non-starter, then how can the West guarantee Ukraine's long-term security after Russia's war of choice ends in Ukraine? That sticky issue is the subject of our discussion today. I am joined in person by Prime Minister Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who previously served as former Secretary General of NATO, and he was former Prime Minister of Denmark. Welcome, Prime Minister Rasmussen. It's a pleasure to have you here. Prime Minister Rasmussen and Andriy Yermak, head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, recently led a distinguished group of experts and former officials to consider the security guarantees Ukraine needs to address the continued threat of Russian aggression. There's nothing more urgent. That document is called the Kiev Security Compact, and it was released 3 weeks ago. The Kiev Security Compact lays out a range of commitments made by guarantor countries to provide Ukraine with the resources to defend itself from Russian forces and their proxies. We are lucky to be joined by two great leaders on Ukraine from Capitol Hill, Senator Amy Klobuchar, a Democrat from the great state of Minnesota, and my friend Congressman Costa, a Democrat from California, who will be giving us framing remarks. Congressman Costa recently returned from Kiev and has a great article in the Hill newspaper about his observations, and I really recommend it. Now, this panel doesn't look like a normal Atlantic Council panel. Support for Ukraine has always been a bipartisan issue and always will be. We invited several Republicans, but scheduling constraints prevented them from joining us. We plan to include more Republicans in our future events. Before I turn to you, Senator Klobuchar, I would like to thank the Eurasia Center's mighty team, especially Andrew Denary, for making today's event possible and his leadership every day. Senator, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Melinda, for that kind introduction. Many thanks to Ambassador Herbst for the invitation to share a few words. It's great to be on with Congressman Costa, who has been such a leader on Ukraine. And you are right, what you just said, Melinda, about Republican support. This has been bipartisan from the beginning. I remember just a few weeks before the war started, I went with the last group of senators, bipartisan group, and then again to the Polish border as we saw the refugees streaming in near the beginning of Russia's barbaric invasion. And then recently, Senator Portman and I went to meet with President Zelensky. And I think it's very important that it stay bipartisan, that it is bipartisan, and that this point be made time and time again. It is also an honor to appear among distinguished leaders like former Secretary General Rasmussen, who joined me in the Capitol last week. We had a very good meeting. And of course, Andriy Yermak, who I saw in Ukraine with President Zelensky. I also want to thank the Victor Pinchuk Foundation and the Atlantic Council for making this event today possible. So we all know we're coming together at a somber time. Just as the Russian parliament finished ratifying agreements for Russia to annex 4 Ukrainian territories, with all of the horrific and fraudulent pomp and circumstance that we saw coming out of Moscow. It makes you realize what Ukraine is up against. It makes you realize what the world is up against. This annexation, false annexation, is an obvious violation of international law. I join the greater international community in condemning it. I think we all know this takeover, illegal takeover, is not going to be recognized. The U.S. has responded with additional severe sanctions on Russian government and military officials, Belarusian military officials, and international suppliers supporting Russia's military-industrial complex. We're also imposing visa restrictions on nearly 1,000 other officials. We will continue these efforts against Russia and those supporting Moscow in these aggressive and unlawful action. And the other piece of it, which is a bit of the focus today for all of you, is as we look at the work that's doing internationally on sanctions and the like to respond to this aggression. We also have to look at the protection of Ukraine. I also talked to Victoria Nuland yesterday. We have to look at it in the immediate, which we all know means getting them the weapons that they need. When I was in Ukraine the last time, I heard the story from our embassy staff that they had gone to a takeout restaurant and they knew they were American, but they didn't know they were with the embassy. And the woman giving back the takeout food had written on the bag, "Thank you for the HIMARS." There are Ukrainian parents naming their kids HIMAR right now. They are forever grateful, as President Zelensky told us, for the weapons and, of course, the javelins and other weapons that we have provided. And of course, they're always going to have ongoing needs. I thought it was interesting when I was there. We are now have a set military high-ranking general dealing with what their needs are for military. And so there is not as much confusion as there understandably was at the beginning of the war. That's been really important. And of course, President Zelensky has immediate needs, some of which are classified, so I'm not going to talk about it from Northfield, Minnesota, after visiting a women-owned brewery. But I think there are needs that they have right now, and some of them have been public. So that's part of security. The other piece of it, of course, is pledges that we can make going forward in terms of what the security outlook would be. That was the topic that I discussed with the former Secretary General this last week, and I really appreciated the work that's been done on that front. I mean, we know what happened with the Budapest Agreement, that Russia did not respect that as a signator, and we have to make sure that any security arrangement in terms of our pledges of security support holds strong. So the other piece I wanted to talk about is just the strength and conviction of Ukrainians on and off the battlefield. The ballerinas putting on camo and going to the front lines. The exhausted nuclear plant workers. When Portman and I were there, that was the big focus because the IAEA were coming in that week. And the work that's still being done, as we know, only the last week, the Russians had held the head of that plant in captivity and have recently released them with the intervention of the IAEA. I think of the cellists playing beautiful melodies in the bombed out remnants of a town square to remind people that culture and love and pride is still very strong in Ukraine. All of that has been part of the Ukrainians' efforts and leaderships. And I think we always thought, after what we'd been through with Russians' attempts to invade our election, I think we thought, oh, how are we going to compete going forward with all their alleged acumen on the internet? And I'm not downplaying it. I'm just saying the Ukrainians and our allies, the dozens and dozens and dozens of countries helping in addition to the U.S., have more than bested them when it comes to working to build support. And some of this is just the brilliant blue and yellow of their Ukrainian flag. And in those bright colors, the people of Ukraine are showing the world what true courage looks like. And we have now seen, when you have that kind of morality and when you have that kind of righteousness on your side, you see what's just happened. Reclaiming the city of Lyman, a key rail hub, and city providing access to the broader Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Even some Russian officials have admitted that the Ukrainian army has made progress. This comes after Ukraine has reclaimed nearly 3,000 square miles of their territory in Kharkiv, as well as significant gains in Kherson in the past month. And we've seen time and time again, Ukrainians and their army really defying the odds. They have been so creative. All you have to see is some of the old jets they have that they rebooted, or when you see the work that they've done with the HIMARS, using them in a way and in multiple times that I'm not sure we quite anticipated, the way they're able to work with the U.S. military in maintenance and repairs. Yet, as Jake Sullivan recently noted, Russia remains a dangerous foe capable of great brutality. The support of the U.S. is going to be critical. As we all know, Vladimir Putin has now announced the mobilization of Russia's army, calling up 300,000 military reservists. I don't have to go over the reaction in Russia, the desperation. Many of the recruits are poor and untrained Russians who will need months of training to become combat effective. And in President Zelensky's words, Russia's decision on mobilization is a frank admission that the regular army, which is prepared for decades to overtake a foreign country, did not withstand and crumbled. We also see the old bag of tricks, including a sham referendum in the occupied territories of Ukraine to justify his illegal annexation, dislocating Ukrainians, busing in Russians to replace them, Russian soldiers even holding voters at gunpoint by removing or threatening everyone who stood in his way. Of course, Putin claims he got the result that he wanted. He is also threatening to deploy nuclear weapons against Ukraine. Well, this is a sign of his growing insecurity. We must take the threat seriously. I say all that, as many of you know all that, but I think it's really important as we, as ambassadors for our own country and as people who are asked opinions from our people we work with and from the general public, we have to be clear that Putin is losing his war. He's failing in his objective to conquer Ukraine in both territory and in hearts and minds. And he has unified the international community against him. And increasingly, and this was maybe a surprise to some, the people of Russia are speaking out at great risk to their personal safety. We've seen the protests in Moscow in the wake of Putin's call-up of the reservists. Reports suggest that how to break an arm at home became the top Google search in Russia. We've seen the exodus of over 200,000 Russian men fleeing the country to avoid being conscripted. As one 29-year-old sergeant in the Russian reserves told The Guardian, "I am simply not letting Putin turn me into a killer in a war that I want no part in." So that's the status right now. And Senator Portman and I can only back up that status. We went right when the counteroffensive was starting, literally that week, is when we met with President Zelensky and Defense Minister Reznikov, as well as Andriy Yermak, who I know is participating in your forum. And I know that they had planned that counteroffensive for a long time. Some of it was public, some of it was not. And that the number one thing that President Zelensky told me to tell everyone I spoke to, which I have done from everything from college convocations to Apple Fest and the like, is that the people of Ukraine are so grateful for the generous, unending, and continuing help from America. But more must be done. We just had a hearing in Judiciary Committee about international war crimes and what our country is doing to work with the Ukrainians on that. Rob and I visited a church in Bucha where over 100 people were buried in a mass grave. We met with the deputy mayor of Irpin. We went there as well, walked through the neighborhood that had been bombarded by Russian tanks. So all of this, as we look at the security pledges that will be made in the future, and now as we look at the investigation of war crimes, as we look at the sanctions, we have to look at this as a multifaceted approach. And I thought that the report that you referenced at the beginning was very, very thoughtful. I'm on my reading list for this week. I just looked at the parts of it, and we are going to consider this as a very important piece of the conversations going forward. And I know Rob and my colleagues on the Republican side feel that way as well. So what's happening now? Congress has authorized an additional $12.3 billion in security, thanks to Congressman Costa, who you'll hear from as well, over in the House, as well as the work that was done in the Senate. And as you know, both Leader Schumer and Minority Leader McConnell are very supportive of this effort. In addition to bolstering the war effort, these dollars are going to fund some of the ongoing government, teachers, policemen, firemen, government employees, pensions. That's something Zelensky talked to Rob and me about when we were there. Building on that support, last week, the U.S. announced we would provide an additional $1.1 billion in aid to Ukraine, including funding for about 18 more advanced rocket systems. The advantage Ukraine has had because of their moral strength, but also because of the fact that American weapons have worked, unlike the Russian weapons, I think is a major differential. Russia's actions have been met, as I noted before, with this near universal condemnation. The fact that Finland and Sweden decided to join NATO, a measure that, by the way, the U.S. supported, as you're looking for more bipartisanship, Melinda, 95-1 vote. 95-1. I got to follow on the Senate floor the one person, Josh Hawley, that was not supporting it. That was fun because I got a personal note from the president of Finland right afterwards, President Nesta, because I was able to respond point by point, noting that perhaps my colleague had never been to the countries of Sweden and Finland, because one would realize that they are incredibly advanced nations with much capability when it comes to defense and recent purchases in the defense area, as well as the credibility and support for the work they have done all over the world. The U.S. has also led the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. This was a big deal within weeks of the beginning of the war, at a time when leaders were still navigating the fallout of the pandemic. A group of over 50 nations came together under the U.S. and the president's leadership and coordinated on the best way to track Ukraine's defense needs and meet them. And because of our international coordination, as you know, we've moved beyond solely talking about how Ukraine can defend itself. And that was the focus of President Zelensky's speech to the UN. By the way, I had the honor of following when President Zelensky gave what was at the time a pretty groundbreaking speech to the Munich Security Conference. I got to follow him on a panel with President Nesta, one of the leaders of Poland, Liz Truss, and myself. And I remember on that panel, I looked at the leaders that were there for that conference, and he had been very aggressive. And I said, look, I know people wanted him to stay in a bunker, but in the end, his point is this: he can't defend his country alone, and that this is democracy on the line, that once we allow a tyrant to invade a neighboring democracy, if we just sit back and do nothing, there will be no stopping him. And that was the point. And I thought that moment, just as when he recently talked at the UN, I thought that moment of him actually addressing the Munich Security Conference and going there was actually quite important. I will end with this. I believe that a few words, 3 words, captivated the international community that we can't forget. And that is when President Zelensky stood outside in his fatigues next to a number of other Ukrainian leaders right when the invasion began, when every pundit, maybe not some on the Zoom call, but a bunch of pundits in our own country and across the world, the going number was 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, that they would fold. He stood in the streets of Kiev and said the simple words, "We are here." He said, "We are here." From that moment on, he and his people inspired the world, a living symbol of courage. So that is my message to all of you at the Atlantic Council, whether we are focused on security going forward, the help we must give now, or the help we have already given. And that is, we are here and we're not going away. So thank you for having me. I wish I could stay and be there in person and do questions or do whatever else. But, you know, I have another brewery to go to. No, I don't really have a brewery to go to. I'm doing some other events across our state, but it really meant a lot that you took me virtually today. So thank you very much.
Senator Klobuchar, thank you so much for your leadership on Ukraine. Thank you for your constancy. And I love what you said. That was so eloquent. And we can say you are here. You and Congressman Costa have been here, and Rob Portman and the whole team on Ukraine on Capitol Hill. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I have to tell you one other name, though. It's not just HIMARS that people are naming their children after. They're also naming their children after Bakhtir, after the drones in Ukraine, and that's a hot name, too. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for summarizing so succinctly. Ukraine is winning, full stop. And also thank you for pushing on economic support just as hard as you have been on weapons. Absolutely crucial. Thank you for your time. Enjoy Northfield, one of my favorite cities. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you. Thank you so much, Secretary General, as well.
Thank you.
Great leadership. Okay, bye.
Bye. Congressman Costa. Sir, you're muted.
How about now?
That's perfect. Could you please tell us how you see things? You're just back from Kiev. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you. And I'm honored to join Senator Klobuchar. And I think she gave a very detailed response in which we share many of the same views. I want to thank the Atlantic Council. I want to thank you, Melinda, and all the good work that is being done today and throughout this very challenging times that we're facing with Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. Secretary General Rasmussen, I'm honored to be with you. Thank you for your good work. And Andriy Yermak, I think, as always, the Atlantic Council has put together a good panel to continue the conversation that is so critical in what I believe is a seminal moment in world history. This is really, as I said at the conference that we were at 3 weeks ago in Kiev, the 2 days that I was there was very important to make a statement not only with regards to the support that the European alliance, NATO, the United States was, I think, making clear to Russia and to everyone about our commitment to Ukraine to ultimately and successfully win this war. But make no mistake about it, we are in this together. And this is therefore the test of our time, whether or not democratic nations can stand together for the common bonds we share, the rule of law, the freedoms that we cherish, and human rights, all of which are being violated by President Putin, who has become a pariah in the world. When we arrived in Kiev 3 weeks ago from the train station, we went to that same grave site that Senator Klobuchar was referencing, where over 160 bodies were buried, women and children, to see the brutality, the horrific nature under which Putin has waged this war. I gave a speech after the attack in Bushka and basically labeled President Putin for what I believe he is, a war criminal. And I think that the whole world has now seen what Putin is willing to do to destroy the people of Ukraine. There's no step thus far that he has been unwilling to take. So I think that as we look back over the last 7 months, I think we first are inspired by the people of Ukraine, President Zelensky and his government, members of the Ukrainian parliament who just last week were in Washington advocating on behalf of Ukraine. The result of that is the third legislative action on an overwhelmingly bipartisan basis, providing some $12.3 billion, $7.5 billion in additional military assistance, $4.5 billion in economic and humanitarian assistance. And, the question is will the West still stay together? The overwhelming majority of Americans, in a poll recently taken a month ago, continue to support America's actions on behalf of Ukraine, along with our European and NATO allies. And clearly, we must do everything we possibly can to ensure that Ukraine wins this war, because all of our democracies are at stake. We saw what happened back in 2008 with Georgia. We saw what happened with the Chechenian war. We saw the slap on the hands that Putin got in 2014 when he rolled into Crimea. And clearly he thought this would be a similar circumstance, I believe, when he invaded Ukraine on February 24th. But Putin has badly, overestimated his ability to not only wage this war, but what we've learned is that all the money that he spent over the last 20 years on his military was a reflection of what we know Russia is today, a corrupt country that is, in essence, what I refer to a Potemkin village. And that corruption that we see in Russia, in what is a declining nation, we see in its military, where they're unable to maintain on a country that they border, supply chain, command and control, and all the other elements that we thought would be a part of what the buildup of Russia's army would possibly present. And not only did Putin overestimate his capabilities, he underestimated, more importantly, the West's resolve. At a NATO Parliamentary Assembly on February 22nd in Brussels that I attended 2 days before the invasion, I've never seen NATO strongly allied, perhaps since the Cold War. And Secretary General Rasmussen probably has his own thoughts in that light. But in addition to that, how the world has changed that we live in over the last 7.5 months, that I doubt that any of us could have anticipated prior to Russia's invasion. Finland, Sweden becoming a part of NATO, one of Putin's perhaps worst nightmares, with an 800-mile border with Finland to Russia, and overwhelming support among the Finnish and Swedish people. That is a testament to the, I think, understanding that Europe has of the threat that Russia poses, not only to Europe, but to Western values. European Union, the support that they've provided would have been unthinkable 8 months ago, financially and otherwise. And NATO continues to provide support, as do we. So this war has to be brought to a successful conclusion on behalf of Ukraine, because it's not just the country and the people that are so valiantly fighting to maintain their sovereignty, but it's really a test of time to Western democracies. Today, we have drawn the line in the sand, and Russia is now backed in a corner. Putin is desperate. His actions in the last week reflect that desperation. We must be concerned about what he may do as a result of that, and therefore we must be together and be fully aware of all the potential there. Clearly, President Zelensky has made many requests to save the sovereignty of his nation. And I think there has been an overwhelmingly positive response to the requests he's made. The most current efforts to become a member of the European Union, I think it's logical. Ukraine is a European nation, and I hope that process continues to be expedited. His desire to become a part of NATO is a process that the Secretary General knows well is a challenging one. But to have 9 out of the 30 NATO countries already in this last week indicate their willingness to accept that, I think it's an important item to note. I view all of this as a work in progress, but clearly we must be focused on the task at hand. And that's ensuring that Ukraine wins this war, and that the Western democracies stay together, and that we build on this, and that we look at the aftermath when a peace ultimately is negotiated, and that is to the restoration of Ukraine itself, possibly using those monies that have been sanctioned and have been withheld from Russia to be a part of a type of a Marshall Plan or reestablishment of all the destruction that Russia has created in Ukraine, so that they can continue to be a very productive contributing member to the European Union, and ultimately, I would hope, NATO. So we obviously have made, I think, a great deal of progress, but it's so much sacrifice, so much sacrifice that the Ukrainian people have made to stand up for their sovereignty and to stand up for Western democratic values that we as democracies share. Much work needs to be done, and we must maintain the bipartisan support that we have in the United States, even though we have a very divided nation. But the congressional action that has taken place so far over the last 8 months has been overwhelmingly bipartisan, and we must maintain that. As Europe is going through this difficult time with winter approaching, we must do everything we can to ensure that our European allies have the necessary support. We've got challenges with inflation. We have challenges with ensuring that we replace the energy needs that Europe has been, in my view, over-reliant on. As we deal with climate change, I have suggested to many of my European friends that relying on Russia for its energy is not a good idea. They've learned that the hard way, and we must do everything we can in the near term to support our European allies to get through this difficult time. Bottom line, we're in this together. So I want to thank the Atlantic Council for allowing me to be a part of this panel this morning. And I know you have more conversation to take place. And I'm here at my university, my alma mater at Fresno State, and we're dedicating the new academic center. And but thank you for allowing me to be a part of this morning's discussion, or at least this morning here in California.
Thank you so much, Congressman Costa. I really appreciate you joining us. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for going to Ukraine. And I hope to see you again there very soon and show you some more interesting places, maybe in Lviv or Odessa next time. Have a great day in Fresno, and thank you again.
Thank you so much. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you. Prime Minister, let's turn to the Kiev Security Compact. Thank you for leading this. Why did you decide to put this document together, and who contributed to the project?
First of all, I would like to thank Senator Klobuchar and Congressman Costa for their strong statements of support for Ukraine. We need that, and I would also express my strong appreciation of the bipartisan support for this in the United States and in general the American leadership on this. You have delivered so many weapons to the Ukrainians, and they have demonstrated their capability to use them efficiently, and it's not least because of the weapons from the United States that we are now witnessing the progress on the ground for the Ukrainians in this war. Why did I do this? I accepted to do the work on this Kiev Security Compact because I think we all have an obligation to help Ukraine all we can. So when I was asked in May whether I would co-chair together with the Chief of Staff in Presidential Administration, Andriy Yermak, this international group of experts to prepare these recommendations, I had no doubt, of course I would do that. So I had 2 meetings with President Zelensky and numerous talks and discussions with Andriy Yermak and an international group of experts counting former prime ministers, former foreign ministers, diplomats and academics. And over the summer, we worked very hard, and on the 13th of September, I went again to Kiev to present this report to the President, Zelensky.
Wonderful. So you've been briefing this new compact, and you've had it out for about 3 weeks. Have you begun talking to the U.S. government, to your government, to the EU, and how has the reception been?
Yeah. President Zelensky asked me to do what I could to promote the security compact in important capitals of potential guarantor states. So I decided to start in Washington because we all know that without an active support of the United States, this security compact will never ever materialize. And I will go to other capitals as well. I have had meetings in Washington with the administration and with members of Congress. And overall, I have only met a positive attitude. There may be details to discuss, but in fact, this is a codification of what is already going on. So the essence of the security compact is to make Ukraine capable to defend itself against any Russian attack. And to that end, you need a very strong Ukrainian military. You need enhanced cooperation on intelligence between Ukraine and its partners. You need joint exercises and training of Ukrainian forces, and we also need to build a strong Ukrainian defense sector. So this is the commitment that potential guarantor states will issue. So the idea is that a group of international guarantors, the US, UK, Germany, France, Italy, Turkey, Poland, just to mention some of the countries, that they commit themselves to help Ukraine build the capacity to defend itself by itself.
Have you already spoken to all these governments, or are you going now and socializing this project? How does it work?
Yeah, no, I haven't spoken with all of them, and we have deliberately refrained from asking governments of approval in advance. We wanted to present the recommendations as we see them as the right recommendations.
Okay.
Then afterwards, we will travel to capitals. Of course, I'm not alone in that. I mean, the Ukrainian government is in the driver's seat, and I know their diplomacy is already working with capitals on this. But I decided to go to Washington. I will also go to Berlin because we need support from the US first and foremost. I have no doubt that once the United States commit to this security compact, then others will follow.
Let's dig into the details a little bit more. Is it legally binding, the idea that you and Mr. Yermak have put together?
In the document, we use the word legally binding because the Ukrainians want to distance themselves from the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. As we all know, the Ukrainians gave up their nuclear weapons back in 1994. Actually, they handed them over to Russia. And in exchange, Russia, the US, and the UK issued the Budapest Memorandum, in which they pledged not to refrain from attacking Ukraine. And they recognized Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, including Crimea. Just to see Russia violate those commitments in 2014 when they took Crimea. So we use the term legally binding to distance this document from the Budapest Memorandum, and we call it a security compact, also to distance ourselves from the Budapest Memorandum. However, legally binding differs from country to country. In some countries, you will need a treaty. In the US, for instance, that would require 2/3 majority in the Senate. Other countries, it's sufficient that the president signs the document and is legally binding. we don't go into details on that. I think what is important is the political commitment, because that's what counts, the willingness to actually deliver capacities to Ukraine.
Okay, so where are we going first? Are you trying to get a guarantee from, or are you trying to get President Biden to sign on right away, or are you going to go talk to the Hill first?
Both, I would say, but we need to have all branches of government in the U.S. behind this. So that's why I spoke with Jake Sullivan on Friday. I met members of Congress, and I have talking with State Department and Defense Department. So I really try to push the U.S. for quick progress on this, and there is one specific reason to do that, because now Putin has announced an illegal annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions. We need a determined response to that, and this compact could be such a response. And we also need to tell Putin, you cannot and you will not win this war, if we connected this security compact to a future peace deal or settlement, it would be too late, because then Putin would have an incentive to continue the conflict to avoid the security guarantees to Ukraine. That's why we should continue to deliver weapons to Ukraine, and in addition to that, sign a compact so that Putin knows this is not just for 1 year, it's maybe for decades.
Help me understand, though, do you envision this compact coming into force after the war is over, or does it come into force now?
Now.
Now.
And that's exactly the point. It should be now, because otherwise Putin will just continue the conflict to avoid the security guarantee entering into force. So the sooner, the better.
And what do you mean by security guarantee? Is this in lieu of NATO membership? Or is there a collective security, kind of Article 5-esque element to what you envision? Can you explain that?
Yeah, there's a clear difference between being a member of NATO and covered by the famous Article 5, and being outside NATO. We all know that it is stated in the Ukrainian constitution that the ambition of Ukraine is to join NATO. And President Zelensky stated last week, as a response to Putin's announcement of the annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions, that now they will accelerate the application for membership of NATO. However, we do know that this membership is not round the corner. And in the meantime, Ukraine needs security guarantees.
Correct.
So we have to deliver weapons to Ukraine to ensure that they will win the war, but we also have to avoid such an invasion in the future. And that's why the security compact is necessary in this interim period.
Prime Minister, is this compact an interim step until NATO agrees on Ukraine's eventual membership?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, I got it. Thank you. Great. So let's talk a little bit more about, you mentioned annexation, the illegal provinces, also that Putin mobilized 300,000 troops, and that Putin has started nuclear saber rattling. What do you make of the nuclear posturing, and do you think will it slow down Ukraine's counteroffensive or our Western support?
No, and it shouldn't.
Okay.
I mean, if we give in to nuclear threats, it would be exactly the same as recognizing, so to speak, the right of nuclear powers to grasp land by force. And of course, that would send a very, very dangerous signal to other autocrats in the world. I think the Chinese leadership is following the Ukraine conflict very closely. And if we are hesitant and reluctant in our response to Putin's illegitimate attack on Ukraine, I think the Chinese would follow suit when it comes to Taiwan. So there is a clear link here, which also demonstrates that the Kiev Security Compact is in the national security interest of the United States, not only because it will send a very clear signal to Putin that we are in this as long as it takes. You cannot, you will not win this war. But also because we could fix the Russia problem, so to speak. It is in the interest of the United States to have a strong and stable Eastern European partner that can be a bulwark against Russian aggression. That could ensure permanent stability in Europe, which leads me to the third interest for the US, namely, it would give the US more room of maneuver to address the real long-term challenge, which is China and the Indo-Pacific. So stability in Europe will give US more resources, so to speak, to address China.
Can I give you one more argument when you're talking to American realists, and they say that the U.S. has no vital interest in Ukraine? Another argument we use here is that it's cheaper to stop Putin in Ukraine than it is in NATO.
Absolutely, and if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, he won't stop there. Next stop would be Moldova, then Georgia, and finally the Baltic states, in particular Lithuania. He would focus on establishing a transit route from motherland Russia to the Russian enclave Kaliningrad. So it's clearly in the US national self-interest to bring a quick end to this war.
How long do you think it's going to last?
I don't know, but of course my concern is that it will be a prolonged conflict. Because that may, at the end of the day, and in particular as the war has developed, be in Putin's interest. By staying in Ukraine, he can weaken Ukraine, he can prevent actually comprehensive rebuilding of Ukraine. That's why I'm concerned about a simmering, prolonged conflict. There's only one acceptable outcome: all Russians out of Ukraine. We shouldn't give Putin an off-ramp. He should just withdraw. That's a clear signal.
Can he withdraw at this point? Is there any way out?
Of course. He could just withdraw all Russian troops, but...
No, politically. Is there any way for him to save face?
Politically, it would be very difficult, and that's why he may feel cornered, and that's also why we should take seriously his nuclear threats, but never ever give in, because one of the very, very important lessons to be learned from history is the following. Appeasement with dictators does not lead to peace, it leads to war and conflict. And Putin only respects one thing: clear language, unity, and force.
Can we back up and talk a little bit more about the compact? I know our listeners are going to be eager for you to explain the details. How does it work? You know, it sounds good in practice. So you are proposing legally binding security guarantees for Ukraine in their diplomatic, economic, and military. And then you want a number of large nations, the United States, the UK, Poland, Germany, France, Australia, Turkey, and some others, to get involved. So is this realistic? And how would it work if you were able to put this together? What kind of military obligations in particular would these countries have if they were to sign on to the compact?
Actually, it is more or less a codification of what is already going on. So I have no doubt that the commitments will actually be followed up by concrete deliveries of weapons, because we see that already. Furthermore, I think the US could also see this as a leverage for increased European contributions. I think those contributions will continue, but I would very much like to see the Europeans deliver more. For instance, the Germans should deliver Leopard tanks. The Ukrainians desperately need Leopard tanks, and they should deliver them now. Until now, the Germans have used as an argument that they won't go it alone.
Yeah.
But they are not alone. I asked in the US, and on all levels, the US answer is, we support the delivery of Leopard tanks. So that could be done. We also need more contribution from France. France has already delivered Caesar missiles, and they have been very, very effective. And recent statements indicate that the French may be willing to deliver even more. I really appreciate that. So all in all, I think it's realistic to fulfill the pledges within a security compact, but I would like to see more European contributions.
Absolutely. But this, just to be very specific, if a country were to sign on, this is not calling for boots on the ground.
No, it is to make Ukraine capable to defend itself by itself. Actually, if you read the compact carefully, you will find a very specific paragraph that expresses the core of this. And this paragraph is very special because it's word by word taken from the joint US-Israeli declaration from the 14th of July this year. During the Biden visit, the two countries issued a joint declaration. And the wording you just referred to is taken from that statement. So very much, you could say that we will now build a Kiev security compact based on the Israeli model. So more or less, we have replaced Israel with Kiev or with Ukraine in our document. And no one doubts that if Israel were to be attacked, the US would do what it takes to make Israel capable to defend itself by itself against any attack. And it's exactly the same that goes for Ukraine. No boots on the ground, but all the help to Ukraine that they need.
Could you say a little bit more about the economic side? So I think this is underappreciated here in the United States. So Ukraine is not a failed state. It is not Afghanistan. Its state services work, its railways work, its banking system works, its trains work, et cetera, et cetera. But it needs $5 to $6 billion every month to remain still a state. And I know that the EU is a bit behind. It pledged $9 billion, and I think only $1 billion has arrived. What's going on there, Prime Minister?
I don't think it's a lack of political will, but we know from bitter experience that the EU bureaucracy is sometimes a bit slow when it comes to actually fulfilling the political pledges. I hope the European Union will speed up this process. I can confirm that Ukraine is definitely not a failed state. Of course, there are many problems. We need to fight corruption. We need to ensure full respect for the rule of law. We have stated that in the Security Compact, and that's actually also the framework of the Security Compact. The Security Compact is, of course, a pledge to deliver aid to Ukraine, but it's a mutual commitment. It's also a commitment for Ukraine to fulfill its obligations. That's another reason why it's in the US interest, actually, to sign such a compact, because it provides a framework for the demands to the Ukrainian authorities to live up to their part of the bargain.
Let me draw you out there. What do you mean? So are you saying that the U.S. Army can learn a lot from the Ukrainian Army? Is that what you're saying?
No, I said that the Security Compact is a mutual commitment. Of course, it is a commitment from the guarantor states to deliver weapons, financial aid, and other kinds of assistance to Ukraine. But it is also a commitment from the Ukrainian side to live up to the fight against corruption, the respect for rule of law, efficiency in public administration, etc. Because the Ukrainian security is closely linked to its capability to deliver basic services.
Absolutely.
And provide security for its citizens.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if Ukraine wants to succeed in the way that President Zelensky has described as this first-rate country with a great IT sector, the vision that he's laid out, they have to have security, right? That's the basic starting point.
Absolutely, and that's also why we need to sign security guarantees already now, because as long as you have Russian soldiers on Ukrainian soil, you will have a conflict, because the Ukrainians will never ever give up. And as long as you have a conflict, it's hard to start rebuilding and reconstruction of Ukraine. So it is a prerequisite for a quick start of the rebuilding of Ukraine that you have security guarantees. It's a message to Ukrainian people: you can safely return.
Exactly.
You are not on your own.
Yep.
We're there. We will guarantee you security. Come back, help rebuild your country.
Is it okay if we call this the Israeli model for short? Are you comfortable with us calling it that, or should we call it the formal Kiev Security Compact?
You should call it the Kiev Security Compact, because the Israeli model is, in some respects, a bit different.
Okay.
Plus, Israel has links with Russia that not always appreciated in Ukraine. So I think it's best served by calling it the Kiev Security Compact, and it's called a compact because we didn't want it to be compared to the worthless Budapest Memorandum.
For sure, for sure. Dig in a little bit more, though, and say more about what Ukraine needs on the defense side, particularly with air defenses and any other missile systems. If countries were to sign on, what kind of systems would Kiev be asking for that they would be obligated to send under this compact?
No doubt that Kiev would request air defense to keep to prevent Russia from destroying basic Ukrainian infrastructure by missile attacks. Until now, actually, the Russians have not achieved air superiority.
Yep.
And that's thanks to the capabilities we have delivered to the Ukrainians. So we should step up the delivery of air and missile defense systems. But they also need capabilities on the ground. And I have already mentioned the Leopard tanks and Caesar missiles. The drones have also showed their effectiveness. So I have a long wish list from Ukraine. And so far, actually, the US has demonstrated leadership by delivering a good example. And we shouldn't underestimate the strength of that leadership. So US global leadership is strongly needed.
So you're a very good politician, and you're good at the game of chess. How do we move the Germans? You mentioned that Germany has been slow to send weapons. In particular, they're not sending these tanks that Ukraine has requested multiple times. I know that German public opinion favors doing more on Ukraine, but it's actually the political elite that's pulling back. How do we fix that? Or how do we bring out the better angels in Berlin?
My guess is that at the end of the day, we will see the Germans deliver Leopard tanks. And I think that's the German problem, that at the end of the day, they will do the right thing. But after so long a discussion and divisions that it seems they've been pushed to do the right thing. I don't understand that German strategy. But I'm following the debate in Germany quite closely, and I have seen that the German opposition in Bundestag is in favor of delivering Leopard tanks. I've also seen that prominent representatives of two of the governmental parties, namely the Greens and the Liberals, are in favor of that. Even some Social Democrats have indicated an interest in doing so. So I think we can build sufficient pressure on the German government. What might be needed at the end of the day would be a public statement from America that the US supports that delivery of weapons. I think that could make a difference. And we need not only delivery of Leopards from Germany herself, but also German permission that other countries that have Leopards in their inventory can deliver to Ukraine.
So this is a common complaint, Prime Minister, that I hear in think tank circles is Germany's not doing enough, but it's also blocking other EU countries from sending weapons. Could you explain that?
No, but it's a general rule that the Leopard tank is produced in Germany. So when Germany exports those weapons to other countries, they can only be resold or re-exported to third countries with permission of the German government. Of course, that's not only in Germany, but very often the policy that to avoid your weapons being exported to conflict zones in the world, you have to get permission from the producer. So in that, there's no unusual.
Okay.
But politically, I think Germany should allow this export from Spain, for instance, or other countries, if they so wish.
Yeah, for sure. Prime Minister, you're speaking to millions of Americans who are watching our discussion on C-SPAN. What would you say to them? How can Americans provide more support for Ukraine? What do you want them to do? So if they say, you know, this Kiev Security Compact sounds very good, we are moved by what you said, we're convinced. What would you like Americans to do after hearing your presentation?
You have an excellent opportunity in the midterms to vote for members of Congress that are supportive of Ukraine and supportive of continued United States assistance to Ukraine. To speak very honestly about it, I do not understand what I would call the isolationists that think that it is in the national security interest of the United States to retreat and withdraw. My experience as a European politician is the following. When the United States retreats, you will leave behind a vacuum, and that vacuum will be filled by the bad guys. And that's exactly why you see Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, and all the other autocrats having got more room of maneuver. So we need more, not less, American global leadership.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. I enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for everything you're doing. We'll check back with you in a couple of weeks, months, and wish you all the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you.